Gold glitters in every legend, but few treasures have cast such a long, haunting shadow over history as the lost gold of the Aztecs. When the Spanish marched into the heart of Tenochtitlán, they were stunned by the wealth they found: jewels, ornaments, and mountains of shimmering metal crafted into objects of beauty and power. Yet almost as soon as it was seen, the treasure vanished. Stories of melted bars, secret caches, and hidden hoards spread across continents, feeding the imagination of explorers, fortune hunters, and storytellers for centuries. What really happened to that gold? Did it sink into the lakes and canals around the great city? Was it carried away in secret by survivors? Was it melted into bars and shipped across the ocean, lost at sea? Or was the true treasure never what we imagined at all? Tonight we will follow the trail of whispers and rumors, the fragments of evidence and the myths that refuse to die, and see how the story of the Aztec gold became one of the most enduring mysteries of history. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. If you enjoy these calm explorations into the past, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's begin our quiet journey into the golden shadows of the Aztecs. Imagine the moment when weary men, their boots worn from months of marching through jungles and over mountains, suddenly caught sight of a city so grand, so unexpected, that it seemed like a dream. It was 1519, and Hernan Cortes and his companions, hardened by battles and deprivation, finally stood on the causeways that led to Tenochtitlan, the jewel of the Aztec Empire. To European eyes, it was a sight beyond comprehension. The city floated like an island upon the waters of Lake Texcoco, its causeways stretching like threads to the mainland, its canals alive with canoes, its markets humming with life. Rising from its center were towering temples and vast palaces, their walls adorned with color, stone, and brilliance. Yet among all the wonders of architecture and society, it was something else that truly gripped the imagination of the Spaniards, something that glittered in every corner, reflected in the water, glimmered in the sun. It was the gold dot for the Aztecs. Gold was not money. It was not exchanged for bread or labor in the way Europeans used coins. Instead, it was a substance imbued with meaning, symbolic of the sun, a material of prestige and ritual. Craftsmen shaped it into discs that shone like captured light, into masks with eyes that stared back at the viewer, into ornaments that adorned nobles and priests alike. It was hammered into delicate sheets, cut into patterns, woven with feathers, and set into shields that were as much art as weaponry. When Cortes and his men first entered the city, they were met with gifts that astonished them. Emperor Moctezuma himself, regal and composed, offered tokens of goodwill that to him symbolized diplomacy and power, but to the Spaniards looked like unimaginable wealth. Masks of solid gold, necklaces heavy with precious metal, shields decorated with golden plates and precious stones, objects meant to awe and establish hierarchy, became, in Spanish eyes, promises of fortune waiting to be claimed. The first glimpses of these treasures were recorded with fascination. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortes's soldiers, described items so finely worked that they seemed beyond human hands. He spoke of plates of gold the size of cartwheels, discs representing the sun and moon, sculptures and ornaments that glimmered in the light of the torches. Every object was a mixture of artistry and symbolism, carrying deep cultural meaning. Yet to the conquistadors, these masterpieces were weighed, not for their beauty, but for their value in bullion. They were already thinking of smelting, of ingots, of shipments across the ocean. This clash of perspective, gold as sacred symbol, gold as raw wealth, was the beginning of a story that would end in disappearance, in mystery, and in legends that still echo centuries later. The marketplaces of Tenochtitlán only deepened the Spaniards' amazement. Vast squares thronged with merchants displaying goods from across the empire, cacao beans stacked in baskets, bright textiles folded into neat piles, exotic bird feathers shimmering in every color, pottery painted with intricate designs. Amid this abundance, gold was woven casually into daily life. Small ornaments, beads, and trinkets gleamed on stalls, traded not as currency but as luxury. To Spaniards who had endured hardship, who had known hunger and scarcity, the casual presence of gold was overwhelming. They wrote home of cities where gold seemed to flow as freely as water, where it adorned not only palaces but everyday life. Their letters stoked imaginations in Europe, where stories of golden empires had long haunted the minds of explorers. The idea that such wealth could exist seemed fantastical, yet here it was, glittering before their eyes. Moctezuma's gifts were meant as gestures of dominance, a way to remind the newcomers of the empire's majesty. But the gifts had the opposite effect. Instead of humbling the Spaniards, they inflamed their greed. Each mask and necklace was not seen as a token of power, but as a sample of what must lie hidden in storerooms and temples. They began to ask questions, to pry, to imagine vast chambers filled with treasures waiting to be uncovered. Even their awe was tinged with calculation, as if every object was a glimpse of a fortune waiting to be melted into bars and loaded onto ships. But there was fear too, for if the Aztecs possessed such wealth, how strong must their armies be? How vast their power? Gold, after all, was more than ornament. It was a visible symbol of authority. To control the treasure was to control the empire itself. Courts realized this quickly. The Spaniards could not simply admire the wealth. They would have to seize it. And to seize it, they would have to dismantle the very heart of Aztec power. The gold was both temptation and challenge, a glittering prize and a looming threat. The first glimpses of Aztec gold carried with them the seeds of tragedy. For the Spaniards, they were proof that fortune lay within reach. For the Aztecs, they were sacred objects entwined with ceremony and identity. Neither side could truly comprehend the other's view, and in that gap of understanding, disaster brewed. The Spaniards believed the treasure could be taken, melted, shipped. The Aztecs believed the treasure could awe, inspire, and bind strangers into their world. Both were wrong. The treasures, so dazzling at first sight, would not last in either form. They would vanish, some into the hands of the Spaniards, some into the earth, some into legend. As you drift deeper into this story, picture those first encounters again. Spaniards staring wide-eyed at gifts meant as gestures of diplomacy, their hands itching to weigh the metal, their minds racing with visions of wealth. Imagine the marketplaces, alive with color and sound, where gold gleamed among feathers and cacao beans, taken for granted by those who had lived with it for generations, but astonishing to those who had crossed the sea. Imagine Moctezuma, regal and deliberate, presenting discs of gold so broad they shone like miniature suns, only to see in the eyes of his guests not respect, but hunger. These glimpses, fleeting yet powerful, were the beginning of a mystery that still endures, the story of gold so abundant, so dazzling, and yet so quickly lost that centuries later we still ask, what really happened to the lost Aztec gold? Imagine stepping across the polished floors of a palace in Tenochtitlán, your boots echoing softly as the light from torches and open courtyards falls across walls painted with vibrant color. You pass through corridors where attendants bow silently, and the scent of incense drifts faintly through the air. At last you arrive before a door guarded by nobles, their attire rich with feathers and jewels. The door opens, and what lies beyond is so dazzling that even hardened soldiers, men who had faced battles and hardships across seas, fall into stunned silence. Before them stretch chambers overflowing with treasures, objects crafted not for trade or commerce, but for meaning, for symbolism, for ceremony. These were the treasure rooms of Tenochtitlan, where the wealth of an empire lay gathered in silence, not to be counted as coin, but to be revered as the embodiment of power itself. Spanish accounts describe rooms filled with items beyond anything their eyes had known. Massive discs of gold hammered into perfect circles representing the radiant sun, smaller discs of silver to echo the pale face of the moon, ornaments shaped into jaguars, eagles, serpents, creatures of myth and nature cast in gleaming metal. There were masks covered in turquoise mosaic, their golden edges glinting like firelight. Shields adorned with feathers and plates of gold leaned against walls, their bright surfaces reflecting back the torchlight in shimmering patterns. Cloaks embroidered with precious stones and thread gleamed like stars when held to the light. In baskets lay strings of beads, necklaces, and bracelets heavy with gold. It was a collection not of coinage but of visions, a treasury of artistry that reflected the grandeur of an entire civilization. To the Aztecs, these rooms were sacred, symbols of continuity and ceremony. Each item told a story. Each piece had a place in ritual, in politics, in the performance of empire. To Europeans, however, these rooms looked like vaults of fortune waiting to be seized. Soldiers whispered to one another, calculating silently. How many ingots could be made from a single shield? How many bars from a single disc? Their imaginations leapt ahead to ships laden with treasure, to ports in Spain where gold would be unloaded by the ton. But what they saw was not what the Aztecs meant them to see. These were not vaults of coin. They were museums of meaning, palaces of symbolism, crafted not for wealth alone, but for power. The scale of these treasures was staggering. Quartz's men recorded piles of ornaments so numerous they could scarcely be counted. They saw vessels of gold shaped like animals, diadems that would have graced the heads of nobles, and bells of pure metal that chimed softly when moved. They described discs so large they could cover tables, and others so finely worked they seemed delicate as leaves. Each object carried both artistry and weight. Even in admiration, the conquistadors could not help but imagine the melting furnace, the transformation of beauty into bullion. Yet beyond the objects themselves, it was the sheer order of the rooms that impressed them. Everything was arranged with care, placed as if to remind the viewer of its symbolic place in the empire. Masks faced outward, staring silently with stone eyes set into golden frames. Shields leaned in rows, feathers cascading in brilliant colors. Discs of gold and silver lay side by side, embodying the harmony of sun and moon. This was not a hoard, thrown together in haste, but a treasury carefully curated, meant to project majesty and stability. To the Spaniards, it seemed both abundance and vulnerability, as if the empire had gathered all its wealth into chambers that could now be taken by anyone bold enough to claim them. The treasure rooms also revealed something about the Aztec world that the Spaniards could scarcely comprehend: the blending of art, politics, and power. Wealth was not meant to be locked away in coffers or hidden in chests. It was meant to be seen, to awe visitors, to remind allies and enemies alike of the empire's reach. Moctezuma's decision to show the Spaniards these rooms was deliberate, a gesture of majesty, yet he miscalculated. Instead of inspiring respect, the display awakened hunger. To men who had crossed the ocean with little more than hope, this abundance seemed like destiny fulfilled. They could not see it as ceremony. They could only see it as fortune dot. In these rooms lay the origins of the mystery that would follow. For much of what was displayed here would vanish within years, melted, scattered, hidden, or lost in chaos. Chroniclers would later argue about how much gold was truly present, how many rooms were filled, how many treasures were taken. Some insisted that the accounts exaggerated, that the Spaniards saw less than they claimed. Others believed the opposite, that what they described was only a fraction of what truly lay in the heart of the empire. The truth is difficult to pin down, for so much of what was seen in those rooms was destroyed before it could be preserved. What we do know is that the treasure rooms of Tenochtitlán burned themselves into the imaginations of those who saw them. Soldiers who had trudged for months through swamps and mountains now stood surrounded by glitter. Men who had fought with steel and hunger now touched ornaments that weighed more than their armor. They wrote home of cities where wealth outshone Europe, where treasures lay so thick that they seemed limitless. The letters stirred kings and merchants, explorers and fortune-seekers, all dreaming of golden empires across the sea. The treasure rooms became legend almost as soon as they were seen, their memory magnified by distance and rumor until they grew larger than life. And yet the treasure was fragile. It existed not only in metal, but in meaning, in the careful rituals that gave it power. Once stripped from its context, once seen not as symbol, but as commodity, it was vulnerable. The Spaniards, blinded by visions of ingots, could not understand that the true wealth of Tenochtitlan was not in the weight of its gold, but in the artistry, the craftsmanship, the culture that shaped it. In their hands, these treasures would not remain as they were. They would melt, vanish, scatter, and leave behind only questions. As you drift into this story tonight, picture those rooms again. Imagine torches flickering against walls lined with treasures, golden discs catching the light, masks with eyes of stone staring outward, shields bright with feathers, and plates of shining metal. Picture Spaniards standing in silence, some with awe, some with greed, all overwhelmed by the abundance before them. Imagine Moctezuma, calm and deliberate, believing he had shown them the power of his empire, unaware that he had instead shown them the prize they would soon risk everything to claim. The treasure rooms of Tenochtitlan glimmered brightly, but their brilliance was fleeting, vanishing into the currents of history, even as they dazzled the eyes of those who first beheld them. Imagine the silence of midnight, broken by the sound of rushing water, muffled footsteps, and the clink of metal hastily carried by men desperate to escape. Torches flare in the distance. Shadows move across rooftops. And in the stillness of Tenochtitlán, danger gathers like storm clouds. It is June 30th, 1520, the night that Spanish chroniclers would later call La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Hernan Cortes and his men, trapped within the city that had once dazzled them with treasures, now crept through its causeways in flight. Behind them lay betrayal, uprising, and bloodshed. With them, carried in bags and boxes, and even stuffed, into armor lay the treasure of the Aztec Empire, seized from the great rooms of Tenochtitlán. In that desperate flight, much of the gold vanished, slipping into canals, sinking into mud, disappearing into legend. This was the night when fortune turned into ruin, when glittering wealth dissolved into mystery. The story of the Night of Sorrows begins with tension that had built for months. The Spaniards, once welcomed, had overstayed their fragile acceptance. Moctezuma, whose gifts had dazzled Cortes's men, was now held hostage in his own palace. Spaniards had seized rooms of treasure, melted ornaments into ingots, and imposed their will on a city that simmered with resentment. When Cortes left briefly to face rival Spaniards arriving on the coast, he returned to find chaos. His lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, had attacked nobles during a festival, spilling blood in the sacred heart of Tenochtitlán. Outrage swept the city. Warriors rose, canals swarmed with canoes, and the Spaniards found themselves besieged, cut off in a city that now burned with fury. Within the palace walls, fear grew. Supplies dwindled, escape routes narrowed, and the air thickened with hostility. Cortes knew they could not hold Tenochtitlán. Plans were made to flee by night, slipping out along the causeways that connected the city to the mainland. Yet there was a problem as heavy as the stones of the city itself, the treasure. Chests filled with gold, ornaments melted into bars. Objects taken from the Aztec rooms now weighed on their minds as much as on their backs. To leave without the treasure was to abandon the very reason they had risked everything. To carry it was to risk their lives in flight. Still, many chose to bear the burden. Soldiers filled bags, stuffed armor, weighed themselves down with glittering metal. They did not know that in doing so they sealed their fate. That night, under the cover of darkness and rain, the Spaniards and their allies began their escape. Horses clattered softly over wooden planks hastily laid across broken causeways. Men carried chests, dragging them with effort, while others slipped into the water under the weight of gold. The treasure clinked, gleamed, and then, as chaos erupted, scattered. For the Aztecs discovered the flight, and warriors poured into the streets and onto the canals. Arrows and spears rained down. Canoes rammed into causeways. Shouts filled the night. The Spaniards, burdened with treasure, struggled to fight and flee at once. Men slipped from planks into the dark water, dragged down not only by their armor, but by the bags of gold tied to their belts. Ingots sank into the mud. Ornaments vanished beneath the lake. Treasure scattered across the causeways. In moments, what had seemed fortune became deadly weight. Chroniclers describe the scene with horror. Men drowning in silence, their bodies pulled beneath the water, weighed down by the very gold they had fought to claim. Others thrown into the canals as bridges broke under the crush of horses and treasure. Chests burst open, spilling jewels and ornaments into the lake, where they glimmered for a moment before vanishing. The night became a chaos of screams, splashes, steel, and fire. Quartz himself barely escaped, wounded and exhausted, while many of his men perished. When dawn broke, survivors looked back on the city with grief. Their numbers thinned, their pride broken, their treasures scattered into darkness. The Night of Sorrows became legend, not only for the loss of men, but for the loss of gold. Spaniards later told of fortunes sinking into the waters of Lake Texcoco, of treasures lying buried in mud and silt. For centuries afterward, rumors would persist of hidden hoards waiting to be uncovered, of bars and ornaments still lying beneath. Modern Mexico City, where canals once ran, treasure hunters dreamed of recovering what was lost, of finding the remnants of that desperate night. Archaeologists in later centuries would uncover fragments, an ingot here, a jewel there, tantalizing, glimpses of what might still remain buried. Each discovery reignited the legend, reminding the world that somewhere beneath the modern city, the echoes of La Noche Triste still gleam in silence. But beyond the treasure itself, the night revealed the fragility of greed. Those who burdened themselves with gold perished quickly, dragged under by its weight. Those who abandoned treasure to save their lives sometimes escaped. The lesson was cruel but clear. In that moment, gold could not save them. It destroyed them. The same metal that had dazzled their eyes, fueled their ambition, and justified their conquest now became the chain that pulled them into the lake. The Night of Sorrows was not only a military defeat, but a haunting parable of obsession, showing how men could die clutching wealth that slipped from their grasp even as they drowned Dot for the Aztecs. The night was victory, but also confusion. They reclaimed parts of the treasure, gathered ornaments and bars that washed ashore, or lay scattered on causeways. Yet much was lost forever, vanishing into the mud and water. The empire, though momentarily triumphant, would not hold its city. For long, Quartz regrouped, rebuilt his forces, and returned with greater strength. When he captured Tenochtitlán again, the city fell, and whatever treasure remained was melted, shipped, or hidden anew. But the memory of that night, when gold slipped into water and vanished into legend, lingered like a scar across both Aztec and Spanish history. As you drift into this story tonight, picture the scene once more. Rain falling softly, planks creaking. Under the weight of men and horses, bags of gold clinking with each step. Then imagine the sudden chaos shouts, arrows, splashes, the crack of wood as bridges give way. Men fall, weighed down by greed, sinking into darkness. Gold scatters like sparks across the water, gleams for a heartbeat, then disappears forever. When morning comes, silence reigns, broken only by the cries of survivors and the shimmer of the city they can no longer claim. The treasure of the Aztecs, so dazzling in the rooms of Tenochtitlan, now lies hidden beneath water and earth, beginning its long journey into mystery. Picture a furnace glowing red in the courtyard of a palace, flames licking upward as soldiers feed it with wood, their faces glistening with sweat. Around them lie piles of ornaments taken from Tenochtitlan golden masks once worn in ceremony, discs hammered to mirror the brilliance of the sun, necklaces so heavy they clinked when lifted, and shields decorated with intricate featherwork and bright plates of metal. These objects, crafted with skill and meaning, were not weighed in artistry now but in ounces and pounds. They were destined for one fate: to be melted down, stripped of identity, reduced to bars of bullion that could be stacked, counted, and divided. This moment when beauty was sacrificed for value was the fate of much of the Aztec treasure. The Spaniards, desperate for wealth, could not preserve what they did not understand. The artistry vanished in smoke, leaving only cold ingots, mute testimony to what had been lost. When Quartz and his men seized treasures from the chambers of Tenochtitlán, they faced a problem. To transport delicate ornaments, massive discs, and fragile masks across jungles, mountains, and oceans was nearly impossible. Ships could not carry such unwieldy shapes. Soldiers could not bear such fragile loads. And so, with little hesitation, the decision was made: melt it. The treasures of a civilization, centuries in the making, were fed into furnaces, reshaped into standard bars easier to carry, to count, to divide among men, and to ship to Spain. What emerged from the flames were dull ingots useful for transport, devoid of artistry. The jewels set into ornaments were pried out, scattered, or hidden, some lost forever in the chaos. Chroniclers record the process with a tone that even they seemed to recognize as tragic. Soldiers stood by as masks cracked under heat, as feathers burned away, as sculptures collapsed into molten pools. The glow of the furnace became the glow of greed, a fire that consumed not only gold but culture. Each bar that cooled on the ground represented dozens of objects destroyed, each ingot a grave marker for lost beauty. To the Spaniards, though, the bars meant survival, reward, proof to present to their king. They dreamed not of artistry, but of caravels laden with wealth, of ports where gold would spill across docks, of glory built not on delicate craftsmanship, but on solid ingots. The jewels presented another mystery. Stones of turquoise, emerald, jade, and obsidian were pried from their settings. Some were pocketed by individual soldiers, secreted away in belts or sewn into clothing. Others vanished into the hands of intermediaries, disappearing from records entirely. Unlike gold, which could be melted and divided evenly, jewels were harder to share. They slipped more easily into shadows, vanishing into private hands or lost in the chaos of battle. Stories linger of gems hidden in earth, carried away by fleeing men, or traded quietly in distant markets. Each jewel tells its own story of disappearance, its own journey into silence. The melting of treasure was not only practical, but symbolic. It represented the transformation of Aztec identity into Spanish wealth, artistry into commodity. To the Aztecs, the objects carried meaning beyond material shields that honored warriors, masks that embodied spirits, discs that represented cosmic balance. To the Spaniards, all this was incomprehensible. They saw only weight, metal, and value. In their eyes, the treasures became ingots, interchangeable, anonymous, valuable only for what they could buy. Thus, in the furnaces of conquest, meaning itself melted away, replaced by bars of silent metal. And yet, even as bars were stacked and divided, much disappeared. Soldiers quarreled over shares, some hiding bars, others losing them in flight or battle. When the Spaniards fled during the night of sorrows, men laden with ingots drowned in canals, dragging treasure with them into mud and water. Survivors spoke of gold glimmering beneath the surface, of bars lying heavy in the lake bed, unrecovered as they rushed for their lives. Later, some ingots were recovered, but many were not. In the centuries since, fragments have been discovered beneath Mexico City. A single bar here, a melted piece there, remnants of treasure once whole, now scattered by time and fate. The loss of jewels was even more profound. Delicate turquoise mosaics shattered in haste. Emeralds vanished into the pockets of men who never returned. Jade beads scattered across causeways during flight. Unlike gold, they could not be melted into uniform ingots. They slipped instead into invisibility, each jewel a mystery, its fate unrecorded. Some may still lie buried in soil, others carried across oceans, their origins forgotten as they passed from hand to hand. The vanishing of jewels was less dramatic than the melting of gold, but no less haunting, for it represented a quieter kind of disappearance, a loss without fire, without record, without trace. For the Spaniards, the ingots became symbols of victory. They carried them back to Spain, presenting them as proof of conquest. Ships loaded with bars crossed the Atlantic, feeding the growing hunger of empires for wealth. Yet even these bars were vulnerable. Some ships sank in storms, their cargoes vanishing into the sea. Shipwrecks litter the ocean floor, holding gold that once gleamed in Tenochtitlán, now resting silently in darkness. Each wreck is a reminder that the transformation of art into bullion did not guarantee survival. The sea claimed much of it, scattering treasure across the ocean floor, just as lakes and rivers had claimed it earlier. The tragedy of melted bars and vanishing. Jewels is not only in the loss of objects, but in the loss of memory. We know the gold existed, we know the treasures dazzled those who saw them, but we cannot picture them fully now. The furnaces destroyed their shapes, leaving behind only descriptions in chronicles and the dull weight of ingots. The jewels slipped into silence, their histories untraceable. What remains are fragment stories, glimpses, rumors, and the occasional archaeological find. The rest is absence, a void where once there was brilliance. As you let the story settle, imagine again. The furnaces glowing in courtyards, the treasures of an empire carried in baskets and placed one by one into the flames. Hear the crack of gold ornaments splitting, the hiss of jewels pried from settings, the dull clink of ingots cooling on the ground. Imagine soldiers dragging bars onto ships, only for storms to scatter them into the ocean. Picture jewels slipping from hands, vanishing into earth, disappearing into centuries of silence. In this way, the treasures of Tenochtitlan melted not only in fire but in history, their shapes dissolved, their beauty erased, their mystery left for us to ponder. Picture a city fallen into silence after battle, its temples broken, its palaces scarred, its streets littered with fragments of a once great empire. Among the ruins, whispers stir. They speak not only of defeat and loss, but of treasure, vast treasure, that has vanished without trace. Gold once seen in the palaces of Tenochtitlan, masks and ornaments described by conquistadors, discs that shone like suns, jewels that glimmered in torchlight, all gone. Where did they go? Some say they were melted into bars and carried away. Some say they sank into lakes during the chaos of escape. But others tell a different story. That much of the treasure was hidden, buried in secret caches by Aztec hands determined that it should never fall into foreign grasp. This is the beginning of legend, the point where history blurs into rumor, where treasure becomes myth. For centuries after the conquest, stories spread of hidden rooms sealed beneath palaces, of chests lowered into canals of tunnels dug hurriedly in the final days of resistance. Chroniclers whispered that Aztec nobles, realizing the empire was falling, carried treasures away in the dead of night and concealed them in places known only to a chosen few. Some claimed that entire chambers were walled up, their entrances disguised so perfectly that no conqueror could ever find them. Others believed treasures were scattered in small caches, hidden beneath houses, beneath courtyards, beneath the very streets where people walked unaware. Each story carried the same haunting promise, that somewhere beneath the soil of Mexico City, the lost gold of the Aztecs still lies waiting. The Spaniards themselves believed it. After the fall of Tenochtitlán, they searched feverishly for hidden treasure. Soldiers dug through ruins, pried into temples, questioned captives, tortured survivors for hints. They uncovered fragments, ornaments, small hoards, but never the vast treasure they imagined. The absence only deepened their suspicion. If so much gold had been seen, why had so little been recovered? Quartz himself was accused by his own men of hiding portions of treasure for private gain. Rival factions fought over rumors of secret stashes. The very mystery of absence became fuel for endless speculation. As years turned into decades, legends grew. Some spoke of treasure hidden in the waters of Lake Texcoco, lowered into canals that have since been buried beneath modern streets. Others told of hoards carried into mountains, sealed in caves, guarded by curses and secrecy. Travelers wrote of villagers who claimed their ancestors knew where gold had been buried, but refused to reveal it. In every generation, seekers arose, some practical, some dreamers who convinced themselves they could recover what centuries had hidden. Their failures only made the legends stronger. The persistence of these stories reveals something about human imagination. Gold, once seen, cannot easily be forgotten. The Spaniards' chronicles described rooms overflowing with ornaments, treasures dazzling beyond measure. When later generations realized that only fragments remained, they could not accept that most had been melted, scattered, or lost. It was easier and far more enticing to believe that the rest still existed somewhere, concealed by cunning hands, waiting in silence. Thus, the legend of hidden caches became inevitable. Some discoveries seemed to offer proof. An ingot unearthed. Beneath Mexico City, a jewel found in the mud of a canal, a relic surfacing from construction, all sparked excitement. All whispered of larger hoards still buried nearby. Each find fed new rumors. If one bar remained, why not many? If one ornament resurfaced, why not entire rooms still sealed? Archaeologists and adventurers alike have chased these clues, yet the great hoards remain elusive. What we find are fragments, tantalizing pieces that confirm the treasure existed, but never reveal its entirety. Legends are powerful not because they are proven, but because they resist proof. The hidden caches of Aztec gold live in the space between history and imagination, where absence is interpreted as evidence, where silence is read as secrecy. To this day, tales circulate of tunnels beneath Mexico City holding treasure, of lakes concealing hoards untouched for centuries, of mountains hiding sealed chambers. Some believe the caches will never be found because they were placed with such cunning that only those sworn to secrecy could ever reveal them, and those voices are long gone. Others think they were never real at all, that the legend itself is The treasure a story too captivating to let go dot as you rest tonight. Picture the city of Tenochtitlán fading into ruin, its palaces quiet, its temples broken. Imagine a group of figures slipping into the night, carrying baskets of gold, masks, and ornaments. They move silently, lowering treasures into canals, digging quickly beneath courtyards, sealing chambers with stone. They leave no mark, no trace, only whispers for future generations. Above them the city falls. Around them an empire crumbles. But beneath the soil, in darkness, something glimmers unseen. Whether real or imagined, the legend endures, the hidden caches of Aztec gold, waiting. In silence their story brighter than the treasure itself. Picture the coastline at dawn, the air heavy with salt, gulls circling overhead, and in the harbor a fleet of Spanish galleons rocking gently with the tide. Their decks creak, their sails are furled, and on the shore men toil with crates, chests, and bars of dull yellow metal stacked carefully in preparation for a journey that would carry them across an ocean. These ships, heavy with cargo, were not filled with spices or silks, not loaded with wool or grain, but with treasure gold stripped from the temples and palaces of Tenochtitlán, melted into bars and packed into wooden chests. To the Spaniards, this was victory measured in weight. To the Aztecs, it was the loss of sacred artistry, culture, and memory. And to the wider world, it was the beginning of centuries of legends about ships so heavy with gold they seemed destined to sink, and about fortunes swallowed by storms, never to be seen again. When the Spaniards consolidated their hold on Mexico, after the fall of Tenochtitlan, they wasted no time in organizing shipments of treasure back to Spain. The monarchs expected returns, and Cortes himself knew his legitimacy depended on what he could deliver. Thus began the long process of melting, stacking, dividing, and packing. Ingots stamped with marks for accountability were lowered into crates, each bar carrying not the artistry of Aztec hands, but the imprint of Spanish administration. Jewels pried from ornaments were wrapped and stored, emeralds and turquoise stones sent to dazzle courts in Europe. Every ship became a vault, every voyage a gamble. The Atlantic was both pathway and peril. The Spanish crown quickly realized that treasure fleets would need protection, and so the system of flotas was born, convoys of galleons sailing together under armed guard, bound for Seville or Cadiz. But in the early years before such systems were perfected, ships sailed alone or in small groups, each a floating fortune vulnerable to storms, pirates, and enemy nations. Sailors spoke in hushed tones about the weight of gold in their holds, of how ships seemed cursed by their burden, too heavy to ride the waves, too tempting to pass unnoticed. For every fleet that arrived safely, another faced disaster. Storms were the greatest threat. The Atlantic, vast and unpredictable, swallowed ships without warning. Galleons packed with treasure vanished beneath waves, their holds bursting open as they struck reefs or rolled in hurricanes. Bars of Aztec gold sank silently into darkness, scattered across the ocean floor. Some were lost forever, others wait. Still, buried under centuries of sand and coral, whispered of by divers and treasure hunters who dream of finding them. Each wreck added to the legend of the lost gold, a story that stretched from the lakes of Tenochtitlan to the depths of the Atlantic. Pirates and privateers added human danger. English, French, and Dutch ships prowled the seas, eager to intercept the galleons. Battles erupted in the Caribbean, cannons thundering, sails torn in chaos, as fortune hung in the balance. Some galleons escaped with their treasure intact. Others were captured, their holds plundered, their gold carried away under new flags. Each confrontation spread rumors of vast treasures hidden in secret coves, buried on islands, or carried off to foreign courts. The Aztec gold, once sacred objects in distant temples, now passed from hand to hand across seas, losing identity but gaining myth. Yet even when ships arrived safely in Spain, the treasure did not always remain visible. Much was absorbed into royal treasuries, melted further, spent on wars, debts, and projects of empire. Gold that had once been a mask or ornament, then an ingot in a chest, now became coin, plate, or simply bullion stored in vaults. Its identity dissolved completely, vanishing into the circulation of wealth. What was once a single ornament made by Aztec hands could end as fragments scattered across Europe, indistinguishable from other riches. The disappearance of Aztec gold was not only physical, lost to storms or pirates, but also symbolic, dissolved into anonymity within empires. The galleons themselves became symbols of Spain's might and greed. Chroniclers in Europe wrote of fleets so rich they seemed to glitter on the horizon, of kings who measured their power, not in lands, but in shipments of treasure. Rumors swirled endlessly of fleets carrying enough gold to bankrupt nations if captured, of single ships heavy with fortune vanishing without trace. These stories fed legends of lost treasure, inspiring adventurers and explorers for centuries. The Aztec gold, carried across the ocean, became not just wealth but imagination itself, the spark of countless quests. But for all the grandeur of these tales, the reality for sailors was hardship. Ships creaked under the strain of weight, storms tossed them mercilessly, disease swept through cramped quarters. The treasure in their holds did not ease their suffering. It often increased it, making voyages more dangerous, drawing enemies, demanding secrecy and vigilance. Men died of hunger, thirst, and fever even as the chests of gold sat silent below decks. In this the treasure seemed cursed, its brilliance shadowed by misery. The legacy of these galleons endures in the wrecks, still lying on ocean floors. Divers have uncovered fragments bars stamped with Spanish marks, coins scattered like sand, relics of ships that never arrived. Each discovery rekindles the story, reminding us that somewhere beneath the waves lies fortune lost in the passage of conquest. Some wrecks have yielded vast hoards, their recovery making headlines and stirring imaginations anew. Others remain elusive, whispered of in records but never found. Together they form a map of absence, a trail of vanished wealth stretching from Mexico to Spain. As you rest tonight, imagine one of these galleons setting sail. The sails billow in the wind, the decks creak under strain, the holds groan with chests of gold stacked in silence. The men on deck stare at the horizon, knowing that storms, pirates, and fate itself could take everything in moments. The ocean stretches endlessly, vast and uncaring, waiting to test them. Somewhere along the journey, treasure will vanish into waves, into foreign hands, into the silence of history. The gold of the Aztecs carried across the ocean, melted from art into bars, will slip once again into legend. And we, centuries later, are left with the question that has no answer. How much was lost, and how much still lies hidden beneath the sea? Imagine the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean in the 16th century, its waters dark and endless, its moods shifting without warning from calm serenity to roaring chaos. Across this treacherous sea sailed ships unlike any others Spanish, galleons laden with treasure, their holds stacked with bars of Aztec gold, silver from other conquered lands, jewels pried from ornaments, and goods bound for the royal treasury. To those who saw them depart from the harbors of the New World, they seemed unstoppable, great wooden fortresses guarded by soldiers and guided by seasoned navigators. Yet once beyond sight of land, they were alone, tiny specks on a horizon that could change from friend to foe in hours. For the ocean was no passive highway. It was a hungry, restless force, and many of those galleons, heavy with fortune, never reached their destination. They sank beneath waves, carrying with them not only men, but entire fortunes into the depths of mystery. Storms were the greatest predator. The Atlantic is vast and merciless, and hurricanes in the Caribbean or tempests in the mid-ocean struck with ferocity that no ship of the era could withstand. Imagine sails ripped like paper, masts snapping like twigs, waves towering higher than the decks, crashing down with a force that splintered planks and sent water flooding into holds heavy with treasure. Men clung to ropes and prayed for daylight, but often dawn never came. Ships groaned, tilted, and in moments they were gone, swallowed by the sea. In those dark depths lay chests bursting with gold, bars stamped with marks of conquest, jewels that had once sparkled in Aztec palaces, all now resting silently under layers of sand. Survivors, if there were any, washed ashore with little more than memories, their tales fueling legends that would last for centuries. The weight of treasure made these ships more vulnerable. Gold and silver, dense and heavy, pulled at their hulls, making them less responsive to storms and more likely to sink if struck by waves. Sailors whispered that the treasure itself cursed the ships, dragging them down in punishment for greed. Whether curse or simple physics, the result was the same: countless fortunes lost to the sea. And because the ocean gave nothing back, each loss became a story of absence, of wealth seen and measured on departure, but never arriving on shore. The mystery of where those treasures lay grew with each vanished galleon. Pirates and privateers added to the danger. English, French, and Dutch captains prowled the waters, eager to intercept Spanish treasure ships. Some succeeded, capturing vessels and carrying treasure into rival ports. Others sank their prizes rather than see them retaken, consigning fortunes to the depths. The Caribbean became a chessboard of ambition, with each shipwreck a piece removed from play, lying silent beneath the waves. In time, stories of these wrecks merged with those of storms, until the ocean itself seemed alive with secrets, a vast vault holding the wealth of empires. Over centuries, hints of these treasures surfaced. Fishermen pulled up coins in their nets. Divers glimpsed shapes in the gloom. Storms washed fragments onto beaches, an emerald, a silver ingot, a shard of worked gold. Each discovery sparked excitement, convincing people that vast hoards must still lie waiting. Expeditions were mounted, maps studied, rumors chased. Some found riches. Many returned empty-handed. Yet the mystery only grew stronger. For every coin discovered, countless others remained lost. The sea, it seemed, guarded its secrets fiercely. In modern times, technology has revealed what chronicles only hinted. Archaeologists and divers have uncovered wrecks where treasure still lies, scattered across ocean floors. Cannons rusting beside bars of gold. Ship timbers collapsed over crates of silver, beads of jewels glinting faintly in beams of artificial light. Each wreck tells a story not only of wealth lost, but of lives cut short, of voyages that ended in chaos. Yet even these discoveries answer only part of the mystery. For every wreck found, dozens more remain hidden, their locations marked only by silence. Somewhere beneath waves still lie fortunes taken from the Aztecs, melted from artistry, into ingots carried across oceans and lost to storms. The deep sea holds these mysteries with indifference. Sand buries treasure, coral grows over it, fish swim past it unaware. What was once fortune beyond measure is now simply part of the ocean floor. Yet for us, the thought of those bars and jewels lying in darkness ignites imagination. The treasure is both real and legendary, existing in the space between fact and story. Each storm that claimed the galleon transformed Aztec gold into myth, scattering it across oceans where it waits unseen. As you drift into rest tonight, picture one of those galleons in its final moments. Waves crash over the deck, sailors shout in desperation, and chests of gold shift in the hold. The ship tilts, groans, and in an instant it vanishes, leaving only foam on the surface. Below, the treasure sinks, glimmering briefly in shafts of light before settling into silence. Centuries pass, sand covers it, coral grows upon it, and the ocean forgets. But we remember. We whisper of shipwrecks, of hidden hoards, of deep sea mysteries. And in those whispers, the lost Aztec gold lives on. Picture the centuries after the fall of Tenochtitlán, when the treasure of the Aztecs was already legend, its fate uncertain, its presence whispered of in taverns, courts, and remote villages. For every ingot melted, for every jewel pried loose, there remained rumors of more treasure hidden in canals, buried beneath ruins, scattered across ocean floors. It was this uncertainty, this absence, that fed the imagination of generations. From the 16th century onward, men and women across continents devoted themselves to the pursuit of Aztec gold. Some came with maps drawn in shaky ink, others with tales passed down by grandfathers who swore they knew where the treasure had been concealed. Some searched mountains, others lakes, others the ocean itself. Their obsession was not only with wealth, but with the story, with the possibility of being the one to solve the greatest mystery of conquest. The Spaniards themselves were the first treasure hunters. Cortes' soldiers, having seen with their own eyes the treasure rooms of Tenochtitlan, never stopped believing that vast portions of gold had escaped their grasp. After Les Noches Tristes, when men drowned in canals under the weight of ingots, survivors swore that the lake bed held fortunes, waiting to be recovered. They dredged, they dove, they dug along causeways, yet much remained elusive. The belief that treasure lay hidden beneath mud became an enduring legend, one that drew seekers back to the waters of Lake Texcoco for centuries. Even in the 17th and 18th centuries, divers still spoke of bars glinting in the gloom, their finds rare but enough to keep the legend alive. As the Empire of Spain grew, tales of lost treasure spread with it. In Europe, sailors boasted in taverns of gold that had sunk with galleons, of islands where survivors buried hoards, of natives who swore their ancestors had hidden riches beyond imagining. Each story became a spark, and for every spark, there was someone ready to chase it. Expeditions launched from ports with the flimsiest of evidence, men convinced that fortune awaited just beyond the horizon. Some returned empty-handed, others vanished entirely, their own lives swallowed by the same hunger that had claimed the conquistador stat in the New World. The legend was even more persistent. Mexico itself became a land layered with whispers of hidden caches. Farmers plowing fields claimed to strike metal in the soil, only to find fragments of ingots. Builders digging foundations unearthed ornaments long buried, their origins unmistakably pre-conquest. Each find confirmed to locals that more lay hidden, that beneath their feet was the fortune of the Aztecs waiting in silence. Stories circulated of tunnels beneath churches, of sealed chambers beneath courtyards, of mountainsides where treasure had been concealed. Whether true or not, these tales gave rise to endless searches. Families passed down rumors, adventurers wrote journals, and the obsession passed from one generation to the next. By the 19th century, with independence movements reshaping Latin America, treasure hunting entered a new phase. Foreign explorers, armed with romantic ideas of discovery, arrived in Mexico with notebooks and shovels. They listened eagerly to local legends, drew maps of supposed hiding places, and scoured ruins for signs of gold. Some hired divers to search lake beds convinced that Le Norche Triste had left behind fortunes. Others trekked into mountains, believing that fleeing Aztec nobles had hidden treasure in caves. For every failed expedition, new rumors sprang up, because the absence of discovery was taken not as proof of nothing, but as evidence that the treasure was still waiting to be found. The ocean, too, became a focus of obsession. Shipwrecks off, the coast of the Americas lured seekers who dreamed of recovering galleons laden with Aztec gold. Divers braved currents, sharks, and darkness in pursuit of bars that had sunk centuries before. Some recovered coins and artifacts, enough to confirm that treasure lay beneath, but never the vast fortunes promised by legend. Yet the very act of finding a single coin, a single fragment of worked gold, was enough to ignite the imagination of countless others. Newspapers in later centuries reported these finds breathlessly, each headline breathing new life into the myth. What makes the obsession remarkable is that it was never only about wealth. Treasure hunters spoke of solving history, of uncovering what others could not, of proving themselves cleverer, braver, luckier. The gold became a symbol of triumph over time and mystery itself. Men sold property, abandoned families, and risked lives in jungles and oceans, driven less by greed than by the dream of being the one to reveal what had remained hidden for centuries. Their obsession was a mirror of Quartz's own men, who risked everything not only for gold but for glory. Even today, the obsession continues. Archaeologists dig in Mexico City and unearth fragments, an ingot melted hastily, a jewel pried from its setting, an ornament buried beneath centuries of earth. Each find, however small, sparks headlines, reminding the world that the mystery of the lost Aztec gold is still alive. Treasure hunters with modern technology scan lake beds, Search archives for forgotten maps, dive to wrecks with sonar and submersibles. They know the odds are slim, yet the possibility is enough. For obsession is not rational. It feeds on possibility, not probability. The persistence of this obsession reveals something deeply human. Gold in the story of the Aztecs is more than metal. It is a story of loss, of conquest, of mystery, of beauty destroyed and wealth scattered. To search for it is to search not only for treasure, but for answers, for a chance to hold history in one's hands. And so the legend of Aztec gold remains one of the most enduring obsessions in history. Its lure undimmed after 5 centuries dot as you close your eyes tonight. Imagine the figures who chased this legend. Conquistadors dragging bars through canals, divers surfacing with fragments in their hands, explorers scouring ruins with maps drawn from whispers, modern archaeologists brushing soil from an ingot stamped with centuries of silence. Each one driven by the same obsession, each one adding to the story. The treasure itself may remain hidden, scattered, or lost forever, but the obsession is the true legacy, the endless human hunger to uncover what has vanished, to hold in the present what slipped into the shadows of the past. Imagine sitting by a fire centuries after the fall of Tenochtitlán, the night quiet except for the crackle of wood and the whispers of elders who had heard the stories passed down. One says the gold was lowered into the lake on the night of the Great Escape, chests sinking into the mud where they lie untouched even now. Another swears the treasure was carried into mountains, hidden in caves whose entrances were sealed with stone. A third insists the Spaniards melted everything, that not a single ornament remains, that what was lost was not the gold itself, but the artistry and meaning. Around the fire, listeners nod, their imaginations captured not by certainty, but by possibility. This is the heart of the mystery of Aztec gold, that no single answer satisfies, that myth and reality are forever entangled, and that what was truly lost cannot be measured in weight alone. The myths are many, and they grew from absence. Spaniards wrote of rooms overflowing with treasure golden discs, masks, ornaments, jewels, yet when inventories were made after conquest, the numbers did not match. Some of what had been described was missing. Some was melted beyond recognition. Some was scattered, lost in canals or at sea. The gap between what was seen and what was recorded gave birth to legend. People asked, if so much was there, where did it go? The absence became proof of hidden hoards, of secret caches, of treasure lost but not gone. Myths grew because silence demanded filling. One myth insists that the Aztecs themselves hid there. Wealth determined that the invaders should never fully claim it. According to this tale, nobles spirited treasures away in the chaos of the city's fall, burying them in courtyards, sinking them in canals, or carrying them to mountains. This story speaks not only to treasure, but to resistance to the idea that even in defeat the Aztecs denied the Spaniards total victory. Yet historians point out that much was indeed seized and melted, and while hiding surely occurred, it may not account for the vastness of the legend. Still, the myth endures because it satisfies the desire to believe that the greatest treasures were never truly surrendered. Another myth focuses on shipwrecks. Spaniards, it says, loaded galleons with so much gold that the sea itself claimed them. Storms dragged them down, and now they lie scattered across the ocean floor, waiting for discovery. There is truth in this. Wrecks have been found with treasure aboard, but the scale imagined by legend is greater than reality. Entire fleets glittering beneath the sea are fantasies, yet the possibility that some portion still rests there is enough to keep divers searching. The ocean, vast and secretive, makes myth almost inevitable. Reality, when we sift it carefully, tells a sobering story. Most of the treasure was melted into bars, standardized for transport, stamped for accounting. In the process, artistry was destroyed, masks shattered, ornaments consumed, mosaics stripped of jewels. The gold did not vanish. It changed form. It flowed into Spain, into Europe, into wars and debts and commerce. It lost its identity, becoming indistinguishable from other wealth. What was truly lost was not the metal, but the meaning, the artistry, the cultural significance, the craftsmanship that told stories of a people. Bars cannot replace masks. Coins cannot preserve symbolism. The true loss was a transformation of beauty into bullion. Yet even reality cannot dismiss all mystery. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments that confirm pieces remain hidden. An ingot dredged from Mexico City canals, ornaments unearthed beneath buildings, coins found in wrecks, all are pieces of a puzzle too vast to complete. Reality acknowledges that much was taken, much was lost, but also that some remains concealed. In this space between myth and fact lies the enduring allure. What was truly lost, then, is both tangible and intangible. Tangible in the sense of objects, rooms of treasures, melted, jewels scattered, bars sunk. Intangible in the sense of artistry and memory, of cultural identity destroyed in fire. The Spaniards carried gold, but not meaning. They transported wealth, but not heritage. What the Aztecs had shaped with centuries of skill was erased in months. This is the deeper loss, one no treasure hunter can recover, one no ingot can restore. Still, myths persist because they speak to hope. To believe treasure lies hidden is to believe something of that world endures untouched. To imagine chests sealed in caves is to picture a fragment of Aztec glory preserved against time. To search is to resist the finality of conquest, to believe that not everything was consumed. Whether or not the caches exist, the myth itself becomes a kind of survival. A way for memory to live on in story. As you drift tonight into rest, picture the difference between myth and reality. See the furnaces blowing, gold ornaments melting into bars. That is reality. See the jewels pried loose, slipped into hands, scattered in canals. That is reality. But also see the whispered tales of nobles carrying treasure into night, of ships sinking with holds full of fortune, of tunnels sealed with stone. That is myth. Between them lies the truth, that what was lost was not only treasure but meaning, and what survives is not only bars but stories. And in the end, the stories are perhaps the greatest treasure, for they keep alive a world otherwise silenced by conquest. Imagine walking through the streets of modern Mexico City. Cars rush by, buildings tower above, neon lights glow where once canals shimmered beneath the sun. Yet beneath the pavement, beneath the foundations of glass and steel, lie the same earth, the same lake beds, the same stones that once held the capital of the Aztec Empire. And with them lies something else, memory, rumor, legend. People say that chests of treasure still rest in the soil, that bars of gold, lost on Les Noches Tristes, remain in the mud, that tunnels and sealed chambers beneath the old city guard what the Spaniards never found. Even if the truth is more ordinary that most of the gold was melted, shipped, spent, or lost, what remains alive is the mystery itself, a story so enduring that it has outlived empires, outlasted nations, and survived into the modern age as one of the most fascinating enigmas of history. This is the legacy of the Aztec gold mystery. Not only the treasure itself, but the way it has shaped imagination, identity, and the way we think about the past. For 5 centuries, the story of the lost gold has been retold in countless ways. Chroniclers in Spain described it as spoils of conquest, proof of empire's reach. In Mexico, it became a tale of loss and resistance, a reminder that beauty was destroyed, but not entirely erased. For treasure hunters, it was a promise of fortune, waiting to be uncovered. For historians, it is a puzzle of evidence and absence, a challenge to separate myth from reality. And for ordinary people, it is a story that never ceases to fascinate, whispered in markets, classrooms, and homes. Its endurance proves that gold is more than metal. It is narrative, memory, and imagination. The legacy of the lost treasure lies first in culture. Writers and poets have invoked it for centuries, painting images of glittering rooms, of treasures hidden in lakes, of shipwrecks heavy with ingots. Painters captured scenes of conquest and loss, dramatizing the clash between Spaniards and Aztecs, the glow of gold amid darkness. Even today, films, novels, and television shows draw upon the story, weaving fact and fantasy into entertainment. The Aztec gold became not only history but art, an endless source of inspiration that transcends the objects themselves. The legacy also lies in archaeology. Each discovery of an ingot, each fragment of ornament, each jewel unearthed beneath modern Mexico City reignites fascination. Archaeologists, unlike treasure hunters, do not seek fortune but knowledge. Yet their finds often confirm what myths have long suggested, that pieces of the treasure remain scattered, hidden by accident and time. These discoveries remind us that the past is never fully gone, that beneath our feet lie remnants of stories, centuries old. And so the mystery persists, sustained not only by rumor, but by the occasional gleam of fact. Economically, the treasure's legacy shaped the world. The influx of gold and silver from the New World, including what came from the Aztecs, fueled Spain's rise and fall. It enriched empires, paid for wars, altered economies. Yet it also caused inflation, distorted trade, and spread wealth unevenly. The very metal that dazzled Cortes's men reshaped global history in ways both beneficial and destructive. The Wathi legacy of the Aztec gold is thus not only cultural but material, woven into the fabric of economies far beyond Mexico. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy is psychological. The mystery of the lost gold continues to capture imaginations because it embodies something universal, the human desire for what is hidden, the belief that somewhere just out of reach lies a treasure waiting to be uncovered. This desire drives explorers into jungles, divers into oceans, archaeologists into ruins. It keeps alive the dream that history is not finished, that secrets remain buried. The Aztec gold, real or imagined, embodies the allure of the unknown, the thrill of possibility, the hope of discovery, and beyond treasure The story carries lessons. It reminds us of the cost of conquest, not only in lives lost, but in culture. Destroyed, artistry melted, meaning erased. It warns of greed, of how men drowned in canals because they carried too much gold, of how wealth meant to preserve glory instead brought ruin. It teaches that what is most precious is not always what glitters, but what holds meaning. The legacy of the Aztec gold is not only in bars and jewels, but in the reminder that beauty and culture cannot be measured in weight alone. As you let this story draw to a close, imagine once more the journey we have taken. We have walked through treasure rooms where discs shone like suns. We have fled into night, hearing the clink of ingots sinking into canals. We have stood by furnaces where artistry melted into dull bars. We have sailed across oceans on galleons heavy with fortune, only to watch storms claim them into silence. We have searched mountains, lakes, and seas with treasure hunters obsessed, listened to myths and measured them against reality, and finally stood here in the present where the treasure remains a mystery that refuses to die. That the true legacy of the Aztec gold mystery is that it endures. Whether the treasure lies hidden beneath soil, at the bottom of seas, or scattered across the world, in melted fragments, its story lives on. It has outlasted empires, survived centuries, and remains one of history's greatest enigmas. Gold may tarnish, jewels may shatter, but the story glitters still, brighter than ever. And so, as you drift into rest tonight, let the treasure fade into silence once more. Picture the calm waters of a lake, the dark depths of the ocean, the soil beneath a bustling city. Somewhere in those depths lies gold, perhaps real, perhaps only in imagination, but always shining in story. That is the legacy. Not possession, not certainty, but mystery itself, a reminder that history holds. Secrets that may never be fully revealed, yet will always gleam in the corners of our minds. The story of the lost Aztec gold does not end with certainty. It does not end with chests recovered from lakes or ships pulled intact from the sea. Instead, it ends in silence, an unfinished tale scattered across fragments of evidence, whispers, of rumor and centuries of imagination. The Spaniards saw rooms glimmering with treasure, yet what survived was melted, scattered, and hidden. Some drowned with their burdens, some lost their lives in storms, and some carried fragments that slipped quietly into the vaults of Europe. What we are left with is not a neat accounting, but a mystery that has endured for 500 years, and perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate us. Gold itself is heavy, finite, and cold, but the story of gold, the lost bars in canals, the jewels hidden in courtyards, the galleons sunk in storms is light, endless, and alive. It grows each time it is retold, each time a diver finds a single ingot, each time an archaeologist uncovers a fragment beneath Mexico City's streets, each time a storyteller whispers of treasures that still lie waiting. The legacy of the Aztec gold is not the treasure itself, but the mystery, the glimmering question that refuses to fade. As you let your eyes grow heavy, imagine once more the journey, the dazzling rooms of Tenochtitlán, the desperate flight of La Noche Triste, the furnaces where masks turned to bars, the galleons rolling on dark seas, the wrecks lying silent beneath waves, the treasure hunters who searched in vain, and the myths that blurred into history. All of it leads here, to this quiet moment where we realize that the true treasure lies not in possession, but in story. And so we close the tale of the lost Aztec gold. The gold itself may be gone, hidden, or scattered, but the story gleams on an eternal shimmer in the tapestry of history, waiting to be dreamed of again whenever night falls. Good night. May the mysteries of the past carry you gently into rest,